Philip II by William Thomas Walsh. Chapter 16. Freemasonry in the 16th Century. There hung about the court of Queen Elizabeth something very like the odour of Freemasonry. Her relative, Sir Thomas Sackville, was a versatile individual, if rather shallow and parsimonious. About 3 years before his arrest in Rome, he was co-author of Heraldic, first performed at Inner Temple on Twelfth Night, 1561. At the end of the same year, if we may believe an account accepted by historians of the Sackville family and by Masonic writers generally, he was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Masons, who were particularly numerous in the vicinity of York. Lodge meetings were held in various parts of England. The Grand Lodge met at York 2 days after Christmas, 1561. As usual, the assembly was secret, but somehow the news got to the ears of Queen Elizabeth, who, fearful of plots against her life and throne, as she always was, suspected the worst. The Queen, hearing that the Masons had certain secrets that could not be revealed to her, sent an armed force to break up their annual Grand Lodge at York on December 27, 1561. But Thomas Sackville, Grand Master, took care to make some of the chief men send Freemasons, who then joining in that communication, made a very honourable report to the Queen, and she never more attempted to dislodge or disturb them, but esteemed them as a peculiar sort of men that cultivated peace and friendship, arts and sciences, without meddling in the affairs of church or state. This Masonic version adds that when Sackville resigned his office in 1567, when he was made Lord Buckhurst and sent to France to negotiate for the Queen's marriage, the Grand Lodge was divided into two. Francis Russell, 2nd Earl of Bedford, was chosen head of the Northern Lodge, and our financier, Sir Thomas Gresham, who had come home in great haste when the Netherlands became too hot for him, was Grand Master in the south. Queen Elizabeth herself was a bit of a joiner. As already noted, she was a free sister of the Mercers Company, itself a secret society. Alert Masonic writers have found worthy of comment that famous court gown of hers, which was completely spangled with peering eyes, a Templar and Masonic symbol to be observed on the back of the shield of the United States and on the US dollar bills of 1936. But this may have been only a coincidence. More deserving of attention, perhaps, are the peculiar signatures and address of some of her letters in the Hatfield papers. About the time when she was leading on the Duke of Alençon, brother of the French king, with matrimonial hopes, she had, as agent in France, one Moine, who used symbols definitely Masonic instead of his name. His letters are in French. One of them ends with Baissons millions de fois ces belles mêmes, from Dunkerque, Saturday after dinner. Another letter of his, December 15th, 1583, ends with even warmer sentiments. Love your Moine, as you have assured him in your last, kissing in all humility your beautiful hands, praying God to give you, with health, your desires. Still another of his letters is addressed in this singular fashion at the top, and is signed, see figure 4. What is the significance of all these symbols? ER, of course, must be for Elizabeth Regina. The triangle is obviously enough a Masonic emblem. The two triangles intertwined, Solomon's seal, are also Masonic. They are used sometimes by separate organizations of Masonic origin, directly or indirectly, and sometimes may be seen on the windows and over the doors of synagogues. The triangle with a small circle in the center is apparently familiar to Royal Arch Masons. The snake-like line in the superscription, figure 3, is sometimes called a Masonic knot. The S, with a diagonal line drawn through it, which appears so profusely, is also much in evidence on the buildings erected by Henry of Navarre. Some antiquaries have tried to connect them with his mistress, Gabrielle, but it is clear that Henry found this on the monogram of his mother, Jeanne d'Albret, and on her medals. Why should this particular device have gained such currency among the heretics who broke the unity of Christendom in the 16th century? Why should its trail extend from London to that court in the Pyrenees where Elizabeth's mother became a Protestant and Conde and the Coligny's came and went familiarly. It is a very old talisman, possibly of Egyptian origin, certainly employed by some of the earliest enemies of Christianity. It was the serpent which the Gnostics, like the later Theosophists, held in veneration, but which Catholic artists represented as trodden underfoot by the Mother of God. It was a highly superstitious age, this age of emancipation from the Church, and there was prevalent a craze for cryptograms, emblems, and devices. It cannot be proved, therefore, that these strange signatures of letters to Elizabeth have any more profound meaning than a playful whim. To be sure, she was then 50 years old, had been completely bald since she was 30, had lost her teeth by disease, had suffered many illnesses, had frequent ulcers on her legs, and retained no vestige of her early good looks, except those still soft and shapely hands of which she was so pathetically vain. Yet whimsical this frustrated woman was, almost to the end of her long life. She was also highly curious and suspicious. If she once learned that something mysterious was going on in a secret lodge room, she was hardly the one to rest until she had penetrated the mystery. It is not impossible that she might have been admitted to some Masonic fraternity, as she was admitted to the Mercers' Company. She might at least have been permitted to use known signs and symbols, and to imagine she knew a great deal about the inner workings of the organisation. About a century later, there is a record of the initiation, in Ireland, of the Honourable Mrs. Aldworth, who became known as the Lady Freemason. In later times, of course, there were lodges which accepted both men and women, and others for women alone. The reception of Elizabeth, then, is not inconceivable, but it is not proved. Her use of these symbols is important only insofar as it helps to establish that they were in use during her time among enemies of the Catholic Church. The question is next to be asked whether these symbols were then the marks, as they are today, of a secret international anti-Catholic society, pretending to have certain Christian characteristics, but exercising a political influence tending to dissolve Christianity. If they were, is this the same society or its continuation? If they were not, why did Protestants of the 16th century use them? Most modern encyclopedias date Freemasonry, at least in its present form, from the first part of the 18th century. Yet if one reads the whole of the article in the Britannica by one of the most scholarly and renowned Masonic writers, one learns that the order was not founded then, but merely changed, in the so-called Revival of 1717, from an operative body into one partly speculative. The evidence of its existence before the 18th century is overwhelming. Many Scotch lodges have records of the 17th century, indicating that they were then long established, and one in particular, the oldest, the Lodge of Edinburgh No. 1, possesses minutes so far back as the year 1599. This takes the inquiry into the lifetime of Queen Elizabeth. If the order at that time was purely operative and not speculative, what were men like Sackville and Gresham doing in it? Without going into the vexing question of the alleged connection of Freemasonry with the Templars, it may be said with certainty that lodges existed, with secret rituals and emblems similar to those of today, during the whole life of Philip II, and considerably before. Some of the guilds of the late Middle Ages employed Masonic symbols at a time when they were plainly under Catholic auspices. Their Freemasonry, if such it was purely operative. On the shield of the Masons of Strasbourg, for example, 1524, we find the compass, triangle, and two hammers, against a woman holding a child, apparently Our Lady and the infant Jesus. This Masonry was purely operative and Christian. The presence of Masonic symbols, then, does not always indicate speculative Freemasonry of the modern anti-Catholic type. It may be that the stonemasons and other guilds of workers began granting honorary membership to persons who did not labour, and that such persons, at a period undetermined, introduced the spirit and ritual of another society, Rosicrucian, or Templar, or Gnostic, which finally, with the waning of the guild system, perpetuated itself as a speculative order. The Masons' Company of London existed in 1376 and was represented in the Court of Common Council. In 1572, this company obtained a grant of arms, one of the first of its kind, which is described as follows: a field of sables, a chevron silver grailed, there castellers of the same garnished width, doors and windows of the field, in the chevron or compass of black. According to Huan, this was the authority or model for all later armorial bearings having a chevron or compass and castles, assumed by other Masonic organizations. The Masons' companies of several other English cities adopted the three castles, with certain variations. The Masons of Edinburgh also displayed the three square castles. The Masonic company there had the device as early as 1686, and the Lodge of Antiquity, No. 2, adopted it in the same year. Individuals also made use of the three castles. There is, for example, the tomb of William Curwen, buried in 1594, when Philip II and Elizabeth were both still living, in St. Helen's Church, Bishopsgate, where Sir Thomas Gresham is buried. On one side of the monument appears the arms of the Curwen family, on the west side the arms of the Masons, as granted by William Hawkslow in the 12th year of Edward IV, 1572, on a chevron engrailed between three square castles, a pair of compasses extended, the crest a square castle, with the motto, God is our guide. Curwen did not adopt this device by whim or accident. The inscription on the south side of his tomb says, "Here lieth the body of William Curwen of this city of London, Freemason, who departed this life the 26th day of December, anno 1594. Now this device of the three castles, which Masonic writers generally claim as their own, appears also on the arms of Sir William Cecil. There are also three fleurs-de-lis. This latter symbol, commonly associated with the crown of France, occurs frequently in the heraldry of Spanish Jews of the Middle Ages, in Freemason heraldic law, and on the flag which the French Huguenots took to Florida with them in 1562, which they may have borrowed from the arms of the Conde family. The Mother Lodge of Madrid, which later introduced the English type of masonry into the peninsula, was called La Tres Flores de Lis. The fleur-de-lis has been used so indiscriminately, however, that its presence may mean nothing. But the three castles give the arms of Cecil a piquant resemblance to those of the Masons of London, Edinburgh, and other places. Is it only a coincidence that the arms of the Spanish Freemasons are described as three silver castles on a blue field, separated by a square, crossed by a gold compass, and have often appeared with the slogan of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity? Historians obviously have not made full use of the assistance that heraldry, like numismatics, can render. There is something to be learned here from Jewish scholarship, especially from some of the very intelligent researches of Dr. Lucian Wolff. Observing that heraldry was not systematized in Europe until the 13th century, he reminds us that the Jews, in spite of the law, had in early times seals, graven with images disposed more or less armorially, and that the Talmud contains references to persons having the functions of heralds. At no time in their medieval history, he continues, did the Jews altogether abandon these emblems. The biblical prohibition anent graven images was compounded with by slightly smudging the image. Sometimes these crests came very near simulating real coat armor. Thus among the Jewish seals still extant is one of Todros Halevi of Toledo, who flourished in the 14th century, consisting of a pointed quatrefoil charged with a triple-towered castle and fleur-de-lis. Is there anything more than an accidental connection between the three castles and fleur-de-lis of Cecil's arms and the three-towered castle with fleur-de-lis of medieval Spanish Jews? It was chiefly through the example of the Marranos, Catholic Jews, that a demand for heraldic devices arose among the Jews. As Dr. Wolff observes, many of the Marranos were allied to the best blood of the peninsula, and had brought with them to Holland and England escutcheons which they had borne with perfect right in their Iberian homes. Some of the wealthier families, Suasso, Mendez, da Costa, Villarreal, Alvarez, Salvador, Cardozo, de Aguilera, and da Silva, registered their arms at Herald's College soon after going to England. Many were not registered, but were used by certain families among the immigrants. Nearly 3 centuries later, this triple-towered castle of the Halevis of Toledo reappears on the arms of no less a person than Benjamin Disraeli, registered by the grandfather of Lord Beaconsfield. It might prove of considerable genealogical interest to ascertain what authority Benjamin de Israeli had for this escutcheon, says Dr. Wolff, seeing that the Halevis of Toledo, as we have already mentioned, used a similar device on their seals, and that Toledo was the home of a very distinguished Jewish family named Israeli, which may have been intermarried with the Halevis. It might also prove of considerable historical interest if some industrious student should ferret out the reason why the arms of Cecil, otherwise Cecil, 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 Cecilt, etc., perhaps the most effective enemy of Christian unity in the 16th century, bore so close a resemblance to those of the kinsmen of the Israelis. But the limitation of this sort of inquiry are strikingly suggested by the presence of a three-towered castle on the arms of Philip II and his ancestors. It was the emblem of Castile, derived originally from Toledo. How and why does not appear. The obvious affinity between Freemasonry and Talmud Judaism has been noticed often enough. It is no longer debatable that, if the false leaders of the Jews did not originate the secret societies to cover their own anti-Christian activities and to influence credulous members of the Christian communities, they had a great deal to do with the business. The degrees and rituals of Freemasonry are shot through with Jewish symbolism. The candidate is going towards the east, towards Jerusalem. He is going to rebuild the temple, destroyed in fulfillment of the prophecy of Christ. He is going to find a lost word, lost, it would seem, on the day when Christ, being lifted up, began to draw all things to himself. Even in feminine masonry, the fifth and last degree shows Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes, perhaps a symbol here for political and religious authority, or as the rituals prefer to say, tyranny and superstition. The Grand Orient and Scottish Rite Lodges, sources of so many modern revolutions, are more militant, more open, and apparently more virulent than some of the others, whom they are leading into a single world organization by gradual steps. The higher degrees of some of the continental lodges manifest the full expression of that ancient hatred of Christ which demanded his crucifixion, and which in later ages slew his priests and trampled on the blessed host. The rank and file of Masons know nothing of all this, but the initiates of continental lodges could tell of a travesty of the Eucharist in one of the highest degrees, of a prayer to Lucifer, and of a crucifix spat upon and trampled. Of the vile spirit here manifested, the rank and file of Masons, especially of the York Rite, and the rank and file of hard-working and credulous Jews, are doubtless unaware. The annals of Freemasonry, says Peter Wernick, usually disclose the earliest Jewish settlers in various localities in the 18th century. In 1658, to go further, just 60 years after the death of Philip II, 15 Jewish families arrived at Newport, Rhode Island, from Holland, bringing with them the first degrees of Masonry, which they proceeded to confer on Abraham Moses in the house of Mordecai Campanale. Descendants of certain of these Jews, originally from Spain and Portugal, went into the whaling industry and founded some of the first New England families. A little later, according to a Masonic authority, American Masonry was introduced into China by the captains of the clipper ships, who came out from New England to trade with the Chinese. Was this only operative Masonry? The official coat of arms of the English Grand Lodge, even to this day, is the one made in 1675 by Rabbi Jacob Yehuda Leon, known as Templo, who went from Holland to England that year. This coat is entirely composed of Jewish symbols, explains Dr. Lucian Wolff. It is obviously an attempt to display heraldically the various forms of the cherubim pictured to us in the second vision of Ezekiel, an ox, a man, a lion, and an eagle, and thus belongs to the highest and most mystical domain of Hebrew symbolism. Its crest is composed of the mercy seat with the attendant cherubim in the orthodox attitude prescribed in Exodus 25:18-20, and its supporters represent the same mystical figures as they appear in Ezekiel 1:2, with their right and left wings respectively extended towards each other and the outer wings covering their bodies. The motto of the original coat, composed by Templo, was in Hebrew, and is given by Lawrence Dermott, the Masonic writer, who saw it in 1759 as Codes la Adonai. The panel here shown, in Dr. Wolff's account, has the motto in English, Holiness to the Lord. Hence it seems clear that this panel is an adapted version and not the original of Templo's design. The same coat of arms is used today by the Grand Lodge of the state of New York, but whether under the Talmudic hands of Templo or those of his successors, the cherubim with wings outstretched seem to have undergone a strange metamorphosis, only too suggestive of the detour of the Jewish mind from the law of Moses to the Talmud. To the casual glance they appear like ordinary cherubim. If one looks more carefully, it becomes apparent they have the hindquarters of goats, with hairy haunches and legs, and cloven hoofs that tread upon the motto, Holiness to the Lord. The trail of Masonry always leads to, and crosses, that of the wandering Jew, whether he actually founded it or not. It appears very early in the 16th century in the memorials of certain Catholics in Spain who were secretly more or less Jews. Its earliest manifestation suggests, in striking fashion too, that those Marano families were by no means all hostile to the Church, but included, side by side with sensualists and scoffers, many devout and generous Catholics. There was, for example, the Bracamonte family. Of Jewish descent, they played an illustrious part in Spanish history. The famous captain of King Philip V, Feliciano Bracamonte, was descended from them, as were the noble families of Laserde y Carvajal, of Teles Giron, and Fernandez de Velasco, the Counts of Contamina, of Paranda de Bracamonte, the Dukes of Medina de Rio Seca. The arms of the Bracamontes on various public and private buildings of Avila suggest their current connection with Freemasonry. Early in the reign of Charles V, a lady of this gifted family died, leaving her fortune to her nephew, Mosen Rubi de Bracamonte, with instructions to use a certain sum for the building of a church in Avila in honour of the Annunciation of Our Lady. This alone suggests the Catholic piety of this good woman of the seed of Abraham. But her nephew, who lived at various times in Flanders, seems to have made other international contacts than those he found in the Catholic Church. True, in 1516 he built the church, as his aunt had directed, and named it Nuestra Señora de la Annunciación. And although the Inquisition stopped the work for a while, it was finally consecrated and became, with its adjoining hospice for old men and women, a centre of Catholic devotion and charity, where Mass has been said even to this day. But Mosen Rubi carried out his aunt's wishes in a form probably unique in the history of Christendom. Within the beautiful octagon of the noble edifice near the north wall of Avil, between the Mercado Chico and the Arco del Marescal, there is a chapel with a startling resemblance to a Masonic lodge room of the Scottish Rite. The interior is a perfect pentagon, with 2 columns at the entrance, as in all the Masonic rites. The coloured crystals holding the lofty windows display Masonic emblems of the 3rd and 4th degrees. The whole chapel, inside and out, is full of Masonic allegories and emblems. The splendid pulpit of white marble is pentagonal, and raised upon a triangular column, carven with the emblems of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degrees of apprentice, companion, and master. These were the only degrees in use, it has been said, before the 17th century. Yet the chief choir seat is adorned with something remarkably like one of the allegories now belonging to the 30th degree, that of the Knights Kadosh. On the triangle at the high altar is the allegory of the 33rd and last degree. The statues of Ruby and his wife are not in the pious attitude of prayer which Spanish convention has decreed for church sculpture, even for the figure of so indifferent a Catholic as Pacheco, Marquez of Villena. Ruby, on the contrary, appears raising his sword in his left hand towards his left shoulder, an allegory of the 30th degree. His wife stands looking on the ground, as if in meditation, her right hand on her left forearm. The Catholic ex-Mason Tirado agrees with the Masonic writer Diaz y Perez that the sculptor seems to have intended a Masonic group to please Mosen Rubi. Other Spanish writers have insisted that the Masonic resemblances in the church have been exaggerated or are accidental. A dissolute son of this Rubi de Bracamonte turned with greater sincerity to the religion of Christ, became a friend of St. Peter of Alcantara, and was highly esteemed by St. Teresa at the time of his holy death. Whether or not the inner circles of the Comuneros of Castile and the Germanias of Valencia, both centres of revolutionary activity under Charles V, were Masonic, is still disputed in Spain, as the possible Masonic organisation of the Jacquerie is disputed. But these questions are outside the scope of the present inquiry. There are persistent traditions among the Spanish Freemasons about some of their martyrs in the so-called Reformation period. A lodge called the Comuneros de Castilla held a session in the 19th century in which Dr. Zapata, a heretic of Jewish descent, condemned by the Inquisition as one of the first Lutherans in Spain, was extolled as apostle of Spanish Freemasonry. The lodges of Valladolid on 4 different occasions, 1839, 1849, 1854 and 1881, held funeral sessions in memory of Dr. Agustin Cazalla, court preacher of Charles V, who was burned after the auto that the Princess Juana and Don Carlos attended in May 1559, and eulogized him as a distinguished martyr of Freemasonry. Whatever may be said about the unreliability of Masonic records, which are often contradictory, one thing is certain: the Masonic tradition everywhere claims and manifests solidarity with Protestants, Jews, Templars, and other enemies of the Catholic Church. There has been a considerable controversy in Spain over the so-called Convention of Grand Masters of Masonry when Philip II was 8 years old. In the archives of the Lodge Frederiks Vrederhal at The Hague, there was found in 1637 a curious document containing what purported to be the record of an international Masonic meeting in Cologne in 1535. According to this account, the heads of 19 of the principal lodges of Europe were present. Vienna, London, Paris, Lyon, Antwerp among them. The 12th signature was that of Ignacio de la Torre, representing the Lodge of Madrid. Another of the signatures was that of Coligny. The document, thus distinguished by one of the chief Huguenot names in France, purports to be a defence against accusations of secret plotting attributed to our Society of Freemasons, who were being charged with wishing to re-establish the order of the Templars, recover their goods and their dominions, and avenge the death of the last Grand Master on the descendants of the kings and princes who were guilty. It is said we try to introduce schism in the Church, disorder and sedition in empires, that we are animated with hatred against the Supreme Pontiff, the Emperor, and all governments, that we obey no other power than our superiors, whose secret orders we execute by letters and by emissaries charged with secret missions, that we do not admit to our assemblies any but people bound by horrible and detestable oaths. After having reflected, we have resolved to expose the end of our order and to send a copy to all the lodges. The document went on to deny that the Masons derived from the Templars, but asserted that their society was very old and very secret, having existed in Palestine, in Greece, and in the Roman Empire. Certain knights, fleeing from the disputes of various sects, but holding religion to be degenerated and corrupted, had formed an association in which there were masters, companions, and united brothers, for an exchange of knowledge. The Grand Master, or Patriarch, although known by few brothers, exists even today. It is by his solicitude that we give this declaration, taken from ancient documents, to spread the rays of light upon all the brothers in our society, and even upon the profane world. Denial was then made of any attempt to disturb religion or authority, or of the use of torture to test apprentices. In conclusion, the brothers were warned to use only the signs and words of the Freemasons of Edinburgh to prove their membership, to admit only men elected by masters aided by 7 brothers, and to acknowledge only one chief, the Grand Master, to the end that the society should be united all over the earth in a single body. The authenticity of this document has been attacked and defended. Tirado cites an anonymous work by a former Freemason explaining that governments all over Europe were beginning to get evidence of the revolutionary activities of the secret society, which seemed to be carrying out the historical mission of the unregenerate Jews, and that they planned to take repressive action. Seeing themselves discovered and in danger, the Masons drew up this pronouncement as the basis of a campaign of defensive propaganda. Great importance has been attached to the document in Holland and Belgium. In Spain there has been some incredulity, chiefly in consequence of its rejection by Señor Vicente de la Fuente. This able scholar, writing in the middle of the 19th century, was of the opinion that Freemasons forged the document in the early 19th century. If they had written it in good faith in 1535, he argued, the name of Coligny, which he took to stand for Admiral Gaspard Coligny, would not have been the best in the world to have signed to a disclaimer of revolutionary activity, since Coligny was notoriously a disturber, a traitor to his king, a revolutionary who sold out his country to her ancient enemy, England. He demanded further, who in 1535 accused the Freemasons of sedition? When were there any contemporary references to this document? Clearly, to his mind, Freemasons accused of having fomented the French Revolution and other disturbances framed this reply to give the impression that their society was very old and had always been subjected to such attacks, all equally groundless. Tirado y Rojas, writing several years after La Fuente, replied that La Fuente offered no evidence to substantiate his supposition that the document was used at the later period for propaganda. Moreover, he asserted that in the Masonic Convention of Basel in 1563, whose celebration is proved by a large number of Masonic historians, the record of the one at Cologne was introduced and was accepted as authentic, and all those who signed as Masons in good standing. This later view has been adopted also by the chief modern Spanish encyclopedia, one of the best in the world. But Espasa, like La Fuente, appears to assume that the Coligny who signed the letter, if any Coligny did, was necessarily the Admiral Coligny who came to Spain in 1519. The Admiral Coligny of St. Bartholomew fame could not have gone to Spain in 1519, for that was the year of his birth. The Coligny who went to Spain at that time was evidently the father of Admiral Gaspard Coligny, himself also Gaspard and Marshal of France, often referred to as General Coligny. This man had 4 sons, 3 of whom became prominent in the Huguenot Revolution. Those 3 were Odette, Cardinal Chatillon, born in 1517, Gaspard, the Admiral, born in 1519, François d'Andelot, born in 1531. Young Gaspard de Coligny was only 16 years of age in 1535. It is true that in that age a boy of 16 was generally looked upon as a man, and might very easily have belonged to a secret society. But in any case, La Fuente's argument about his being a revolutionary firebrand is utterly beside the point. In 1535, Coligny had given no evidence of his future seditious proclivities. He professed to be a good Catholic. When he went to court in 1539, he became a friend of Duke Francis of Guise. His brother Odette, who seems to have been overlooked in all this dispute, was only 18 in 1535, but he was old enough to have travelled widely, and to be a glaring example of the abuses in the Church, which later aroused his indignation when he could no longer profit by them. Made a cardinal in 1533, when he was but 16, he went to Rome to vote for the successor of Clement VII. In 1535, at 17, he was made Archbishop of Toulouse, and the following year, the year in question, was given the bishopric of Beauvais. At various times between 1533 and 1542, he made journeys with his heretical mother. If Tirado is right in affirming the authenticity of the Convention of 1535, the Coligny who signed the document may have been Cardinal Chatillon. His later activities as a secret emissary, travelling from one enemy of the Catholic Church to another, from France to the Netherlands and to England, are very much like those which the supposed document of 1535 indignantly denies. Before the Church took official cognizance of Freemasonry in the 18th century, and even afterwards, Catholics joined the society, through ignorance or malice, or both. Even priests were members from time to time. It makes very little difference, however, which of the sons of Marshal Coligny signed the Cologne paper, or whether any of them did. They were all prominent in the movement in which both Protestants and Freemasons were engaged. The connection between the groups was so evident, even in the 16th century, that it may be inferred the key men belonged to both. The evidence that connects such bigoted Protestants as Cecil and Coligny, Russell, Sackville, and Gresham with Freemasonry is at best circumstantial. Yet circumstantial evidence is sometimes very strong in its cumulative effect, and in English law men are still hanged on the strength of it. The descendants of most of these Protestant chiefs were found, within a generation or two, to be leaders in Masonry. For example, we cannot prove that William of Orange was a Freemason, but we find him in one of his marriages becoming son-in-law to Admiral Coligny, and his direct descendants are high officials of Freemasonry when concealment is no longer necessary. Before the end of a century, his great-grandson, William III, will be joining the Freemasons at a time when, with their connivance, he is being placed on the throne of England to replace the legitimate Catholic monarch, James II, and the expenses of the expedition will be paid by a Jewish banker of Amsterdam, Isaac Suasso, who in return for his 2 million gulden will be made Baron de Grasse, while other Jews, Sir Solomon de Medina and Alfonso Rodriguez especially, put up the money for the final conquest of Ireland, which John Harrington had already proposed farming out to the Jews. 2 generations after the death of Philip II, the issue between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry was fairly well drawn. Within 150 years, there would be a sufficient accumulation of evidence to justify a pope in pointing out the identity, nature, and associations of the Masonic fraternity in all its forms, and to warn all Catholics to have nothing to do with it. It may have existed, and probably in some form did exist, before the Reformation itself. It may have been the secret political machine by which the Reformation was established, if not caused, or it may have grown up simultaneously with the Reformation, to separate later into a different form of heresy. Or, finally, it may have developed out of the intrigues of the Reformation. All this is obscure and may never be clarified, but it seems a reasonable hypothesis that something very much like modern Freemasonry, surely in spirit and probably to a great extent in form, possibly the identical organization, possibly a parent organization, it really makes little difference, existed in the time of Philip II. It is not at all certain that authorities, political and religious, were as unaware of the existence of 16th century Masonry as Señor de la Fuente believed. To be sure, they probably had no idea of its full extent and its capacity for evil intrigue. But even at the beginning of the century, it must have struck some persons as odd that secret assemblies of workmen had begun taking in nobles and politicians who knew nothing of their craft. In 1522, this type of organization was prohibited in Switzerland, doubtless for good reasons. Francis I in 1539 revoked the privileges of similar groups in France, and about the same time had a few heretics burned who claimed to be Templars. The Inquisition under Philip II, moreover, gave careful attention to a secret society which, if not then Masonic, was destined to keep its name, form, and principles for 2 centuries, and then to have a remarkable influence upon the Grand Orient Lodges of France. This was the society of the Alumbrados, or Illuminates, large numbers of whom were discovered in Estremadura through the interruption of a sermon against Protestantism by an hysterical woman. Many arrests were made, and the ramifications of the sect were discovered to be so extensive that the Holy Office reported the matter to Philip and the Supreme Council of the Inquisition, who set in motion a special investigation by Don Francisco de Soto, formerly Inquisitor in Córdoba, Seville, and Toledo. The Alumbrados were so powerful that they attempted to poison him, as the secret Jews had slain Saint Peter Arboes and poisoned his associate almost a century before. It was found that under a pretense of virtue and of reformed religion, they professed to be individually illuminated by the Holy Spirit. These wretches, like the early Priscillians and Albigenses, were engaged in a wholesale campaign of defamation against the clergy and the church, of seduction of rich widows, the compromising of young girls in nocturnal orgies, assassination, and all manner of subversive activity. As Professor Merriman notes, the sect often vented itself in hallucinations and in sexual aberrations, and was utterly abhorrent to the officials of the Suprema. Several of these subversives were executed from time to time, but large numbers escaped and made their way north, where they finally reappeared in Germany with the Latinized name of Illuminati. In the middle of the 18th century, they underwent a reorganization of some sort at the hands of Spartacus Weishaupt, with such volcanic effect that their emissaries, including the infamous Anacharsis Cloots, who signed himself the personal enemy of Jesus Christ, illuminized the French Masonic lodges to prepare them for their share in bathing France in the blood of the Revolution. Conceivably, in an earlier period, Philip II and the Inquisition saved Spain from a similar fate at their hands. But the king and the Holy Office probably looked on an agitator of this type as just one more example of medieval heretic, having a more or less hidden connection with the Jews driven from the peninsula, and with the Jews who remained as Catholics. Francis Bacon, nephew of William Cecil by marriage, and son of that Nicholas Bacon of low origin, who assisted Cecil so zealously in destroying the Catholic worship of England, is the final witness for the existence of Freemasonry as an active secret organisation, already speculative, despite the 20th century encyclopedias, and connected in some mysterious way with the Spanish Jews. In him, the old Gnostic paganism of the Rosicrucians and the new ambitions of Freemasonry for the control and transformation of the world meet so strangely, with a dash here and there of Protestant idealism, that it has been much disputed whether he was a Rosicrucian, as De Quincey believed, or a Freemason, as many Masons have held. Nicolai, the friend of Lessing and editor of Moses Mendelssohn, went so far as to call him the founder of modern Freemasonry. In support of this latter view, it is pointed out that the Freemasons of London have borrowed much of their phraseology from Bacon's work. Another student of secret societies and Baconiana believes that the Freemasons and Rosicrucians were one and the same thing, with a joint aim of restoring paganism to the world, which is perhaps another way of saying destroying the Church of Christ. It was the object of both, says this writer, to shelter, preserve, and hand on as lamps for posterity these heathen antiquities and pagan rites, and he quotes a Masonic student to the effect that the Freemason Society was founded for the purpose of concealing the rites of the ancient pagan religion under the cover of operative Masonry, and that although the religion is extinct, its ceremonials remain and clearly develop the origin of the institution. And Bacon, in his opinion, was active in promoting a general reformation throughout Europe, either in league with the Rosicrucians or in favour of Masonry. Be that as it may, this much is fact, and significant fact. The intelligent and mean-spirited Francis Bacon, Cecil's nephew, sitting in a house stolen from the Catholic Church, or paid for with church loot, wrote about 1625 a treatise called The New Atlantis, which was not published until after his death. This opus, joyfully claimed by Freemasons as their own, tells of the erection and institution of an order or society, which we shall call Solomon's House, the noblest foundation, as we think, that ever was upon the earth. It was named for King Solomon, and, says the speaker, I find in ancient records this order or society is sometimes called Solomon's House, and sometimes the College of the 6-Day Works. An elaborate feast of the family, presided over by the terson or father of the family, is then described, its ritual very suggestive of that of Masonry. Then there is a long explanation of the purposes and activities of the order by a mysterious Jew named Joabin. The English Christian reader, however, is assured that, although he was a Jew and circumcised, for they have some few stirps of Jews yet remaining among them, whom they leave to their own religion, yet they are of far differing disposition from the Jews in other parts. For whereas they hate the name of Christ, and have a secret inbred rancour against the people among whom they live, these, contrariwise, give unto our Saviour many high attributes, and love the nation of Bensalam extremely. Surely this man of whom I speak would ever acknowledge that Christ was born of a virgin, and that he was more than a man, and he would tell how God made him ruler of the seraphims, which guard his throne, and they call him also the Milken Way, and the Eliah of the Messiah, and many other high names, which though they be inferior to his divine majesty, yet they are far from the language of other Jews. And for the country of Bensalem, this man would make no end of commending it, being desirous, by tradition among the Jews there, to have it believed that the people thereof were of the generations of Abraham, by another son whom they call Nachoran, and that Moses, by a secret Kabbalah, ordained the laws of Bensalem, which they now use, and that when the Messiah should come and sit in his throne at Jerusalem, the kings of Bensalem should sit at his feet, whereas other kings should keep a great distance. But yet, setting aside these Jewish dreams, the man was a wise man and learned, and of great policy, and excellently seen in the laws and customs of that nation. Is Bensalem a figure for England, and are the laws which they now use the new dispensation of Cecil and Thomas Cromwell and their servants? Is this a subtle way of saying that Freemasonry, which claims Moses as one of its founders even to this day, had brought about the Protestant Revolution in England by a secret Kabbalah? One almost hears the voice of a suave Spanish Marrano professing such a limited reverence for Christ as American rabbis still pay him in occasional sermons, and flattering the English Christian with the Talmudic sounding legend that he is really a sort of first cousin to the Jew, and almost as good, and will get his share when the Messiah finally appears. The denial that Christ is the Messiah is done so deftly that the victim of the propaganda will probably not ask himself whether the future Messiah to whom he is asked to give his allegiance may not turn out to be the Antichrist. Later, a messenger interrupts the Jew with some secret intelligence, and he disappears. Next day he explains that there is word come to the governor of the city that one of the fathers of Solomon's house will be here this day 7 night. We have seen none of them this dozen years. His coming is in state, but the cause of his coming is secret. I will provide you and your fellows of a good standing to see his entry. The mysterious personage arrives in sumptuous clothing and kingly state, evidently from Spain, for he wears a Spanish montera and speaks in the Spanish tongue. Seated on a throne richly adorned, he speaks to the initiates and explains to them the true state of Solomon's house. Among other things, he says that the end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. The order has many caves, some 3 miles deep, for the concealment of its experiments in science, alchemy, the producing also of new artificial metals, and medicine. It has also high towers on 3 different levels, the upper, lower, and middle regions, and they use them for observation, conservation, refrigeration, and so on. The members of the order control medicine, science, astrology, and a large variety of natural commodities and riches, and music, in which even quarter tones appear. There is also a very elaborate and interesting organization. For the several employments and offices of our fellows, we have 12 that sail into foreign countries, under the names of other nations, for our own we conceal, who bring us the books and abstracts and patterns of experiments of all other parts. These super spies, so similar to Sir Thomas Gresham and others of the creatures of Cecil, are called, appropriately enough perhaps, merchants of light. There are others called depredators, pillagers, others known as mystery men, pioneers or miners, compilers, dowry men or benefactors, lamps, inoculators, and interpreters of nature. We have also, as you must think, novices and apprentices, that the succession of the former employed men do not fail, besides a great number of servants and attendants, men and women. And this we do also. We have consultations, which of the inventions and experiences which we have discovered shall be published, and which not, and take an oath of secrecy, for the concealing of those which we think fit to keep secret, though some of those we do not reveal sometimes to the state, and some not. If Bacon did not intend this unfinished work to be an allegory of Masonry for the benefit of a few of the elect, it is all the more astonishing that he powerfully suggested, in veiled fashion, so much that modern friends and foes of the craft have discerned in it. The allegory could hardly be closer without letting the cat out of the bag. To the general public, with no information about secret societies, it would seem a harmless tale to pass away the time. But there is now enough authentic evidence available from various sources to make it clear what he was driving at. The possible Jewish origin of the craft, its direction by certain of the Sephardic Jews posing as Catholics in Spain, the hierarchical organization with wheels within wheels, inner circles almost completely unknown, directing the activities of the innocent novices, the elaborate spy system, the use of great wealth to gain power under cover of philanthropic and scientific purposes, the oath of secrecy concealing matters which it would not be healthy to reveal to the general public, the essentially anti-Christian tendency, the sop to unthinking people with Christian predilections, the far-flung system of intrigue and espionage, even a hint of world domination, are these not all clearly foreshadowed under the skillful imagery of the New Atlantis? The universal revolution, or Reformation, which so many modern Masons, more conspicuously the Grand Orient Lodges, have sought in communism and in the League of Nations, was undoubtedly preached by Bacon and his followers in this manner, just as Paracelsus had foreshadowed something of the sort, and as the Rosicrucians had preached it under the sign of the Rose and the Cross, or the Rosy Cross, which had also been used by the Templars.
It is futile to discuss which of these organisations came first, or which grew out of or influenced the other. There they are, all similar in spirit and purpose, all disguising under allegories, often quasi-Christian, a determined hatred of the Church of Christ, and all bound up in some fashion, either as cause or result or both, with heretical movements. Perhaps it was not merely a coincidence that, after Martin Luther left his cell, he took for his seal the rose and cross. As one student of Masonry says, some deep religious significance, at the time well understood, must have recommended the device to the choice of the Tertius Elias. Lord Verulam had a brother named Anthony, who wandered about the continent for 11 years during the crucial period of England's struggle with Spain. At one time he is in Venice, at another time he is at Bordeaux, in friendly communication with the Sieur de Montaigne, whose mother, Antoinette de Lopez, or Lopez, was the daughter of a Spanish Jew. The Sieur de Montaigne had much to do with sowing the seeds of scepticism that prepared for world revolution, though by some strange contradiction he remained a Catholic of sorts. Thus, when he went to Rome, he attended a circumcision and heard a rabbi preach, but at Loreto paid his devoir to Our Lady. Anthony Bacon was in constant communication with his brother during those years of study and observation, as they are represented to be. He also acted as an intelligence agent for his uncle, William Cecil. He has all the appearance of one of those peripatetic merchants of light, mystery men or inoculators, described by his brother Francis in The New Atlantis. Finally, to complete the skeleton of this invisible kingdom, it appears from Masonic records that Freemasonry was the door by which the young son of Mary Stuart passed completely into the power of Cecil and the other enemies of his mother and of the Church Catholic. But long before the entry of King James VI as freeman, mason, and fellow craft, before he was even born or conceived or dreamt of, the international intriguers having set up poor, vain, frightened Elizabeth as a royal symbol behind which their invisible army might begin a march to world power in opposition to the Church of Christ and the culture it had quickened, had begun to spread their nets under the feet of the young Scottish queen and poet who was preparing, amid tears, to return to her own land. Toward the end of April 1561, Ambassador Throckmorton wrote a highly interesting letter to Elizabeth, relating a conversation he had had with Coligny, after which he had said that Lord James Douglas, Mary Stuart's bastard brother, later Earl of Murray, had just arrived in Paris, and immediately came to my lodging secretly, and proceeded to set forth at good length all that passed between the Queen, his sister, and him. Thus did Murray, one of the most despicable of all the men who have soiled the earth, betray his sister into the hands of her enemies and the enemies of Christendom, full 24 years before they could encompass her death. He told the plausible Throckmorton that she did not intend to ratify the Treaty of Edinburgh until she could gain the support of the three estates, her people's representatives in Scotland, that she was not well pleased with the existing kindness between England and Scotland, and disliked the Scots who were well affected toward Queen Elizabeth, as well she might. Finally, that she was as careless of French as of English friendship, and might ask the estates to let her marry some foreign prince. To all this Throckmorton piously added, I do well perceive the Lord James to be a very honourable, sincere, and godly gentleman, and very well affected to your majesty. Miss E. M. Tennyson, whose English and Protestant loyalty prevents her from seeing anything but honour and virtue in Cecil, and the other astute scoundrels who served him, is willing to believe of Lord James that few more treacherous and cold-blooded mortals have ever exploited and betrayed a sovereign. She naively supposes that the wily Throckmorton was taken in by him. Being far too clever to try and bribe Throckmorton by personal offers, he had worked on that ambassador's devotion to Queen Elizabeth as the potential head of a Protestant world state, to be built by means of suitable alliances, to the confounding of the King of Spain and the Pope. Yet she herself continues to cite Throckmorton's letter urging the Queen to spend £20,000 sterling per year for pensions, to be scattered among Scottish noblemen, especially Lord James, whose credit, love, and honesty is comparable, in my judgment, to any man in that realm. It now becomes apparent, though Miss Tennyson in her zeal has overlooked it, why Lord James did not try to bribe the virtuous ambassador of the Queen and Cecil. He did not have to. He knew perfectly well that Throckmorton's employers would bribe him, and continue to bribe him until his credit, love, and honesty should place their royal quarry in their hands, and so bring the Protestant world state a step nearer. About 6 weeks after Throckmorton enjoyed the confidences of Lord James Douglas, he received a long report from another member of the international ring, John Emmanuel Tremellius, then at Reims attempting to see the young King Charles IX and closely in touch with Cardinal Chatillon and other Protestant leaders. According to his own account, he was travelling from place to place to form a confederation of all Protestant princes. He had encountered some opposition. He suggested to Throckmorton that Queen Elizabeth secretly solicit that the various rulers separately to evade the hindrance of the Emperor Ferdinand and others. He himself was willing to perform this service if the Queen would give him letters of credence. This labour of love apparently occupied him for some years. 7 years later, 1569, he appeared in London, ostensibly as the agent of the Protestant elector, the Count Palatine, conferred with Elizabeth on an international political league against the Catholic Church, and was about to go to Scotland to see Lord James Douglas, then regent, Mary Stuart being in prison, on the same business. This on the authority of Cecil and of the Spanish ambassador in London. On the surface, this emissary or merchant of light seemed a typical Protestant zealot of the Calvinist variety. Far from opposing the Church of Christ, he professed to identify the shifting and changing dogmas of the various sects with that body, as opposed to the fixed and eternal teachings of the Church of Rome. The very soul of his belief seemed a violent hatred of the latter. He wrote Throckmorton of those wicked persons who wished to kill the members of Jesus Christ, and he attributed to priests, monks, and Catholic leaders generally a plot strangely like the one actually attempted at Amboise by the various Protestants about a year previously. That plot, if it existed, did not prevent the Huguenots, only a few months later, from sacking and desecrating Catholic churches in various cities of France and killing the priests and monks who were supposed to be so dangerous. At the very moment when the Calvinists were planning their deliberate atrocities of 1561, Tremellius wrote piously of the conspiracy of the wicked against the faithful, whom they call Huguenots, appointing a certain day for falling upon the flock of Christ. This gives rise to the suspicion that there is a general conspiracy, like that of Haman against Mordecai and God's people. It is an interesting coincidence that the Protestant organizer should identify Catholic leadership, religious and lay, with the Haman whom the Jews all over the world had hanged in effigy for centuries as a symbol of their enemies, and who appears prominently also in the ritual of modern Freemasonry. Philip II became curious about this apostle of the new freedom, though not until 1568, and got a report on him from his then ambassador in London, Guzman de Silva. The report was not quite accurate, for it made Tremellius an Oxford man. Cecil, who was better informed, left a record at the same time which corrects the Spanish account. He wrote of Tremellius as one who heretofore in King Edward's time read the Hebrew lecture in Cambridge, where he was a friend of Cranmer, Anne Boleyn's chaplain. "He is a heretic," wrote Philip's ambassador, "and in the pay of the Queen. He is the son of a Jew of Mantua." This part of the report is confirmed by modern Jewish researchers, which identify Tremellius as an endemized and baptized Jew. Historians have been curiously blind to all this. Prescott had a glimpse of what was going on, though his prejudices and the lack of much information now available preventing his seeing it fully or understanding what it meant. "The Protestants of that time," he wrote, "constituted a sort of federative republic, or rather a great secret association, extending through the different parts of Europe, but so closely linked together that a blow struck in one quarter instantly vibrated to every other."